Bioactive setups within a vivarium or terrarium are systems of many layers, with waste products from one species or feature being consumed by another, typically having a much more enriching habitat for the creatures inside. These are not specifically for invertebrates, but generally feature them. These types of setups can also be used for reptiles or amphibians to help bring out more natural behaviours where it is more enriching. They usually cost a lot more than not going down the bioactive route relatively, and take a lot more time to plan, time to set up and care of multiple factors in balance. Many of the sections will have separate video at some point with much more in-depth coverage, but this is an overview of bioactive setups. Prior to setting up a bioactive tank, planning is a must as everything needs to work together to some extent. Firstly, decide what the main purpose of the setup will be. If there is one particular species you're wanting to care for in there, this is more specific in reptile amphibians but equally true for invertebrates. Secondly, look at what type of environment that invertebrate, in this case, comes from. Is it tropical? Is it arid? These factors are important, especially in the case of selecting species and factors to work together. This, for example, tarantulas, where their natural habitat, but also if they are terrestrial, i.e. ground dwelling, usually in a burrow, or arboreal, tree dwelling, can be a big factor, especially in the overall shape of the tank selected for the enclosure. We know by now what environment and what format the bioactive setup would be, so next logically we need to look at the substrate used. Depending on your invertebrate species and their needs, for example burrowing, this will dictate the depth of the substrate. This will usually be a blend of various materials, for example coconut core, sphagnum moss, orchid bark and sand may all be used within specific ratios, and that's very much species dependent. Again, the more wetter environments, you may also consider a drainage layer at the bottom of the habitat to act as a reservoir. I have decided to split decor from substrate. Some of this will still be classed as substrate, but usually it will form a defined layer within the habitat or a feature. This may include a layer of leaf litter, which is important for isopods and myriapods, for example, or a corner of the enclosure with more sphagnum moss than anywhere else, which can act as a hydration station for the more arid species, which usually like a drier substrate on the whole but still need water. Other factors to consider are hides for some species. These could be burrows or cork flats for the more arboreal species to climb up. Humidity and ventilation work hand in hand. The more ventilation can reduce the humidity locally. Not enough, and there could be issues with mould growth within the habitat. Some species, notably Avicoria, require cross ventilation. This is not to be confused with poor ventilation. Air holes within your habitat matters, with positioning, size and number all taken into consideration to allow for ventilation. This is species dependent on their humidity and ventilation needs. Live plants within a bioactive setup are a major consideration, where they have to match the environment like everything else, i.e. would you put a rainforest plant within an arid setup? It wouldn't grow well. Some plants also affect humidity, such as ferns or similar. Also, these are dependent on what creatures you will be housing, as something too sharp or spiky might damage a tarantula if it was to fall upon them. Also, detrivores will eat live plants if there's not enough detritus for them to eat, or if their population explodes. Cleanup crew, which are based of isopods of varying types, myriapods, some worms, and especially in the more arid setups, some beetles. These will eat the detritus, decay within the setups, including leftover food, leaf litter, and any creature feces. These can also outcompete with unwanted pests such as mites, and control some types of mould. Again, cleanup crew have their own needs, which has to be the correct species from a similar environment to the main species should be considered. Watch out for population explosions in times of plenty, but also when there is not enough food provided, they may turn to eating the live plants. Alternatively, cleanup crew may also act as a food source for some of the larger invertebrates, reptiles and amphibians. You may want to consider multiple species within your bioactive setup. We have already discussed the use of cleanup crew, which could be multiple species in itself, but some may be symbiotic with one another, especially when they come from a similar environment. This would again provide an enriching environment where it would mimic the natural habitat of some species in respects. Assuming there is enough food not to compete with one another, as that would result in one species not having enough nutrition in the diet, or perhaps one eating the other in rare situations. In summary, the setting up of a bioactive enclosures definitely have an enriching and behavioural benefits to the invertebrate species residing in the setup. The bioactive setup would be to some extent more sustaining, as we would still need to provide water and food to the primary consumer. However, other species will be introduced to help keep the environment clean. However, this certainly does take much more planning than a one invertebrate environment, plus an additional time and cost factors to ensure everything works together, with considerations about nutrition within the substrate and food provided enough for everything, not just the one species. Thank you for watching. If you have found this video useful, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. This will give you updates on new releases of a similar nature. This is very helpful to us. We do appreciate it. Check out our social media links found within the description of this video. We also love discussion, especially if you have another point of view. Please add your comments, it helps us improve our content. We do have plans to make many more videos in the future, however these might have content updates as our work progresses. Our videos might be updated and re-uploaded at any point as our research progresses. Thank you once again.